I never let anyone into my wine cellar. Not friends, not extended family, and certainly not my own son until the day he turned 21. But when my son's new bride started asking a few too many questions about those dusty, cobweb-covered bottles resting in the cool dark of my basement, I didn't just grow suspicious. I installed a professional-grade biometric lock one, equipped with a fingerprint scanner and a code that only existed in my head. It didn't take long for me to discover that she was desperately trying to break in. It was in that cold, startling moment that I realized just how predatory and entitled my daughter-in-law truly was. But the joke was on her. She had absolutely no idea that I had already uncovered another, far more sinister secret she was hiding. And I was going to make her pay for every lie, every manipulation, and every vicious little scheme she had brought into my home. I'm truly grateful you're here with me today to hear this. Before we begin, do me a favor, drop a quick comment down below and let me know where you're watching from. What city or country are you tuning in from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Just a quick note, this is a fictional story designed to explore some very real, meaningful themes about family, trust, and the boundaries we must set to protect ourselves. Any resemblance to actual people or places is completely coincidental. Let's begin. The biometric lock was ripped clean off the wall. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, staring down at my wine cellar door, which was hanging open like a violated sanctuary. The solid steel panel I had installed just 8 weeks prior was dangling by its wiring, the circuit board exposed and glinting sharply in the dim, yellow light of the stairwell. Someone was inside. I could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps on the concrete floor. Then, the faint, unmistakable click of a smartphone camera capturing images in rapid succession. My hand automatically found the doorframe, gripping the wood for support. My blood ran cold, but my mind was already racing. For 40 years I worked as an aerospace engineer. I spent decades calculating stress loads on mechanical components that would carry human beings through the unforgiving vacuum of space. I designed fail-safes. I built redundancies that simply could not be broken. And yet, standing in my own home, I realized I had failed to protect the one place that mattered most. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand exactly how I ended up standing at the top of those stairs, calculating the precise moment to spring the trap I had set, you need to know who I was before all of this madness began. My name is Elliot Brennan. I'm 57 years old. Up until about 7 years ago, I had what most people would consider a charmed life. I spent 4 decades in the aerospace industry, specifically designing advanced HVAC systems for commercial aircraft. I worked alongside some of the most brilliant minds in the field. I lived and still live in a beautiful, sprawling home in Burns Park, one of Ann Arbor's most serene and sought-after neighborhoods. It's the kind of place where autumn leaves collect like copper coins on the front walkways, and the neighbors actually wave to each other. And then there was Rosalind, my wife, my partner, my absolute everything. Cancer took her from me when she was just 49. The doctors gave us 12 months. She fought like hell and gave me 16. I watched her battle every single day with a quiet grace that still breaks my heart every time I let myself think about it. During her final month, she couldn't even leave our bedroom. But even at the very end, when the morphine had dulled the edges of her immense pain, she would squeeze my hand. "Promise me you'll keep living, Elliot," she told me, her hazel eyes locking onto mine. "Promise me you won't let this turn you into a ghost." I tried to keep that promise. Some days were infinitely harder than others. 5.5 years ago, after the dust of my grief had somewhat settled, I threw myself into one final massive project to keep my mind occupied. I developed a revolutionary valve system for commercial HVAC units. It was designed to reduce energy consumption by 18%, while drastically improving airflow efficiency. The patent came through 3 months after I submitted the designs. The licensing agreements followed shortly after, and the royalties started rolling in like clockwork. $31,500 a month, every single month. 4 different manufacturers licensed the technology, and the quarterly production reports were staggering. I retired the day the patent was granted. I'd spent 40 years building machines for other people. It was finally time to build something for myself. The wine cellar became my sanctuary. Rosalind and I had started collecting wine about 15 years into our marriage. We didn't collect those absurdly expensive, investment-grade bottles that sit in climate-controlled vaults just to act as financial instruments. We bought wines we wanted to drink, wines that marked moments in our lives. A 2005 Napa Cabernet from our 20th anniversary trip. A 1998 Bordeaux we popped open the night our son, Dominic, graduated from college. After Rosalind passed away, I couldn't bear to drink them. But I also couldn't bear to get rid of them, so I built her a shrine. The basement renovation took me 8 months of painstaking labor. I installed professional-grade climate control, exactly 55 degrees Fahrenheit, 70% humidity, monitored by thermal sensors that I calibrated myself. I built custom racks to hold over 300 bottles, arranging them by region and vintage. I even brought down the small tasting table where Rosalind and I used to sit on Saturday evenings. I go down there most nights, not to drink. I rarely ever open a bottle anymore. I go down there to remember her. I go to talk to her in the quiet cool of the cellar, even though I know she can't answer. The wine collection itself is appraised at roughly $200,000. But the true value of that cellar isn't in the glass bottles. It's in the heavy, fireproof filing cabinet I installed behind the back rack, completely hidden from casual view. That cabinet holds my patent documentation, my licensing agreements, my expansive investment portfolios, and the detailed financial records of everything I've built since my wife died. Everything a person might want if they knew where to look. My son, Dominic, doesn't know about the cabinet. He knows about the wine, of course. He helped me install the initial cooling system years ago. But I never told him about the documents. There was simply no reason to. He is 30 years old, building his own successful career as a civil engineer. He's out there building bridges, while I'm down here preserving memories. Dominic has his mother's eyes. He is thoughtful, methodical, and profoundly kind. Perhaps a little too trusting for his own good. Our lives were peaceful, predictable, and safe until 10 months ago, when everything changed. Dominic had just returned from a structural engineering conference in Chicago. He walked into my garage workshop with an expression I hadn't seen on his face since he was a teenager. He was breathless, bright-eyed, and practically vibrating with energy. "Dad," he said, before I could even set down my socket wrench. "I met someone." He pulled out his phone and swiped through his photos. "Her name is Genevieve Walsh. She's 28, an interior designer based out of Austin." He turned the screen toward me. The woman in the photo was undeniably striking. She had dark hair, flawless makeup, and was wearing a designer dress while standing in a newly renovated loft with exposed brick walls. Everything about the image screamed polish and control. "We met at the hotel bar," Dominic continued, unable to stop smiling. "We started talking about architecture at 10, and we didn't stop until 3 in the morning. She actually cares about load-bearing calculations, Dad. She gets it." Over the next few weeks, Genevieve became the absolute center of Dominic's universe. She drove up from Austin every other weekend, 7 hours each way, without a single complaint. By March, just 4 months after they had met, Dominic approached me during our Sunday morning coffee routine. "Genevieve's lease is up next month," he said, his hands fidgeting with his mug. "She's thinking about relocating to Michigan. Would it be okay if she stayed here? Just until we figure things out." Every instinct I had honed over my 57 years screamed no. 4 months was not enough time to truly know a person. But then I remembered Rosalind's voice. "Let him make his own choices, Elliot. She's welcome here," I said. Genevieve arrived on a crisp Saturday in early April. She pulled into my driveway in a sleek, late-model BMW that looked entirely out of place next to my practical truck. She stepped out wearing designer jeans, a cashmere sweater, and leather boots that easily cost more than my first car. "Mr. Brennan," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "Dominic has told me so much about you and about your beautiful Rosalind. I am so incredibly sorry for your loss." Her voice was smooth, polished, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. That first dinner was pleasant enough. She complimented the house, praised my cooking, and asked seemingly thoughtful questions about my career. But then, as I poured the wine, the conversation took a very specific turn. "This is such a lovely neighborhood," she said, swirling her glass. "Properties in Burns Park must be worth quite a bit. I suppose you've been here, what, 25 years? I nodded slowly. "The equity you must have built up is incredible," she continued, her eyes locking onto mine. "Do you own any other properties in the area?" Dominic jumped in, completely oblivious. "Jen's always thinking about investments, Dad. She helps her clients optimize their spaces for maximum resale value." Something about the line of questioning set off a faint alarm bell in the back of my mind. It was subtle, but it was there. Over the next few months, there were other moments. Little red flags fluttering in the breeze. The way she would pause outside the basement door, asking what was down there. Her intense interest in my retirement plans. She casually asked Dominic if I had set up a trust for him. Questions that could have been brushed off as innocent curiosity, but felt deeply calculated. 4 months later, Dominic found me in the workshop holding a small velvet box. Inside was a princess-cut diamond. "I'm asking her tonight," he said. "I know it's fast, but when you find the right person, you just know." They were married in our backyard in September. It was a beautiful 50-guest affair, with string lights draped through the maple trees. Genevieve moved through the reception in a magazine-worthy gown, demanding attention from every person in the yard. 3 days after they returned from their honeymoon, she made her move. "Elliot," she said over dinner, placing her hand delicately over Dominic's. "We've been talking. Why don't we just move in here? At least for a while. This house is far too big for one person, and family should be together." Dominic looked at me with such immense hope. How could I say no to my only son? That was my second mistake. When Genevieve moved her things into the guest suite, I expected moving trucks. I expected furniture. Instead, she arrived with 3 suitcases and a handful of very expensive decorative items. "I sold most of my things," she explained smoothly. "Fresh start. Besides, your home is already so beautifully appointed. I wouldn't want to clutter it." For the first week, she played the role of the perfect, devoted daughter-in-law. She cooked, she cleaned, she laughed at my dry engineering jokes. And then, she started bringing me coffee. "You looked so tired last night, Elliot," she said softly one Monday morning, stepping into my study with a steaming mug. "Cream and 2 sugars, right? I've been watching how you take it." It was Rosalind's old cup, the one with the chipped handle. "Thank you, Genevieve," I said, touched by the gesture. It became our daily routine. Every morning, between 6:45 and 7 a.m., she would bring me my coffee. And every morning, I drank it. 2 weeks after she moved in, she brought up the basement again. "I've been meaning to ask," she said over pasta one evening. "What exactly is down there? I keep seeing you go down those stairs." "Wine cellar," I said simply. "Climate-controlled storage for my collection. Dad is extremely protective of it." Dominic chuckled. "I helped him build it, and even I'm not allowed down there." Genevieve's expression shifted. Just for a fraction of a second, her face hardened into pure calculation. "A wine collection," she murmured. "That must be quite valuable. The investment potential alone, not the history of the wine, not the memories, the investment potential." That night, around 2:00 a.m., I got up for a glass of water. As I stood in the dark kitchen, I heard a soft, metallic click. I peeked around the corner. The hallway was dark, but I saw a shadow retreating rapidly up the stairs to the guest suite. Someone had been testing the handle to the basement door. The very next morning, I drove to the hardware store and bought a keyed deadbolt. I installed it on the wine cellar door myself, keeping the only key on my personal ring. I told myself I was being overly paranoid, but a week later, everything started to unravel. It began with the headaches. A dull, throbbing pressure behind my eyes that started about an hour after I finished my morning coffee. Then came the memory lapses. I misplaced my car keys, searching the house for 20 minutes before finding them in my coat pocket where they belonged. I forgot a lunch appointment with Marshall, Dominic's best friend. "You're getting old, Elliot," I muttered to myself in the mirror. But my neighbor, Norman, changed my perspective completely. "Elliot," Norman called out one afternoon while I was trimming the hedges. Norman was 65, a retired math teacher who noticed absolutely everything. I don't want to overstep, but I've seen your daughter-in-law walking around to the back of your house a lot lately. Yesterday, she spent 5 minutes looking through one of your basement windows. The small one by the deck, she was taking pictures with her phone. My stomach tightened into a hard knot. The window to the wine cellar. That afternoon, I went to a specialty security store downtown and purchased the biometric keypad. 6-digit code, plus fingerprint verification. I spent 2 hours installing it on the cellar door. The old deadbolt I removed was covered in fresh, tiny scratch marks. Someone had been trying to pick it. When Genevieve saw the new lock that evening, her mask slipped. "New lock?" she asked, staring at the glowing digital keypad. The old one was sticking. I lied effortlessly. "What's the code?" "You know, in case of an emergency." "I'll remember it," I replied, meeting her gaze dead on. "It's just for the wine." Her eyes went completely flat, cold, dark, and furious. "Of course," she said sweetly. "Your private sanctuary." 3 days later, I completely forgot how to drive to the grocery store. I had been taking the exact same route down Washtenaw Avenue for 15 years. But suddenly, the street signs meant nothing. The buildings looked foreign. Panic seized my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. I pulled over to the shoulder, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and I wept. 57 years old, crying in my truck because my mind was disintegrating. When I finally managed to call Genevieve, she came to get me. As she climbed into the passenger seat, I saw her expression. It wasn't relief, it wasn't worry, it was triumph. Dad shouldn't be driving anymore. "Dom," she told my son that night, "this is getting dangerous. We need to think about his safety." I stood in the hallway, listening in the dark. "He's only 57, Dominic argued, though he sounded terrified. "Age doesn't matter," Genevieve insisted. "I've been researching memory care facilities in the area. Places with 24-hour supervision, professionals who can manage his cognitive decline. Memory care facilities. Once I was declared incompetent and locked away in a facility, my medical power of attorney would shift to Dominic. And Genevieve would have total control over him, and by extension, every single asset I owned." I didn't go to sleep that night. I went to my study, locked the door, and opened my laptop. I started with a simple Google search of Genevieve Walsh Interior Design Austin. What I found over the next 4 hours would turn my fear into pure, unadulterated rage. Her professional website looked perfect, too perfect. Genevieve Walsh Design featured a minimalist layout, sleek portfolio images of high-end lofts, glowing client testimonials, and a premium Austin business address. But 40 years in aerospace engineering had taught me to trust my instincts. When a mathematical equation doesn't balance, you don't ignore it. You dig until you find the variable that's causing the error. I ran a reverse image search on her entire portfolio. Every single photograph was pulled from stock photography websites. I searched the Austin business address. It was a virtual mailbox service located in a strip mall next to a laundromat. I checked the domain registration for her website. It had been created exactly 7 months prior, just 3 months before she miraculously bumped into my son at that hotel bar in Chicago. Then, deep in an archived Reddit forum regarding relationship scams, I found the final piece of the puzzle. A Houston engineer had posted a warning 14 months ago. Fiancé disappeared with $75,000 after I proposed. Warning to others. The engineer described a woman named Emily Foster. 27 years old, interior designer. They met at a professional conference. It was a whirlwind romance. She moved in fast, got engaged, and showed an intense, immediate interest in his elderly father's property and assets. She repeatedly suggested moving his father into an assisted living facility due to cognitive decline. 3 weeks after the engagement, she cleaned out his savings accounts and vanished into thin air. The physical description of Emily Foster matched Genevieve down to the last detail. I found an archived screenshot of Emily's deleted social media profile. It was the same face, same dark hair, same cold, calculating eyes. I sat back in my desk chair, my hands trembling. She wasn't just a gold digger. She was a professional predator, and she was systematically destroying my brain to get her hands on my money. The very next morning, when Genevieve brought me my coffee in Rosalind's chipped mug, I accepted it with a tired smile. I waited until I heard her footsteps retreat down the hall. Then I carried the mug into my master bathroom and poured the dark liquid straight down the sink. I watched it swirl down the drain, taking with it the fog, the confusion, and the poison. Not today, I whispered to my reflection in the mirror. I needed a professional. I called Marshall Reed, Dominic's best friend, and told him I needed a recommendation for a private investigator. Marshall didn't ask questions, he just gave me a name. Gerald Paxton's office was located in a nondescript brick building near the University of Michigan campus. Gerald was a 53-year-old former Ann Arbor police detective who now specialized in high-stakes fraud cases. He had the hard, cynical eyes of a man who had seen the worst of humanity and was rarely surprised by it. I laid my evidence across his desk, the website screenshots, the forum post, and a detailed spreadsheet I had created the night before, meticulously tracking my memory lapses, headaches, and periods of confusion. Every severe symptom, I explained, pointing to the columns of data. Peaks within 2 to 3 hours of drinking the coffee my daughter-in-law prepares for me every morning. The 3 days this month, I skipped her coffee because of early appointments? I was completely lucid. Gerald studied the materials, his expression grim. Classic pattern. Elder financial abuse targeting widowers with significant, easily liquidable assets. The poisoning angle is extreme, Elliot, but unfortunately, it's not unheard of. Can you give me a few days to dig into this Emily Foster alias? I'll give you whatever you need, I said. But my son thinks I'm losing my mind. If she pushes for a medical evaluation while I'm still under the influence of whatever she's giving me, she'll get medical power of attorney. Stop drinking anything she hands you, Gerald ordered. And see a doctor immediately. Get a full toxicology workup. If she's dosing you, it will be in your blood. The next 3 days were agonizing. I had to maintain the performance of a lifetime. I shuffled my feet. When I walked, I paused in the middle of sentences, pretending to search for basic words. I left cabinet doors open in the kitchen, but most importantly, I poured every single cup of Genevieve's coffee down the drain. The physical transformation was miraculous. By the 3rd day, the heavy fog in my brain had completely dissipated. My memory was razor sharp. I stood in my garage and calculated complex load-bearing equations in my head, just to prove to myself that my mind was still my own. It had been the coffee all along. On Thursday, I sat in the examination room of Dr. Gloria Martinez. I chose her carefully. She was 49 sharp, no nonsense, and had zero previous connection to my family, meaning Genevieve couldn't possibly manipulate her. Dr. Martinez, I said as she closed the door, I need to tell you a story that is going to sound completely insane. But I need you to listen to all of it before you react. I told her everything, the timeline, the sudden onset of symptoms, the coffee ritual, the private investigator's findings. I handed her the spreadsheet. She listened in absolute silence. Her professional demeanor, masking what I could tell, was growing horror. I need a comprehensive toxicology panel, I finished. Blood and urine. I need to know exactly what chemical cocktail she is putting into my system. Dr. Martinez didn't hesitate. She pulled out her pad and ordered a full screen for benzodiazepines, antipsychotics, heavy metals, and sedatives. 48 hours later, she called me back into her office. The lab results were spread across her desk. She pointed to a highlighted section, her voice clinical but tight with anger. Lorazepam and quetiapine, she said, tapping the paper. Lorazepam is a powerful benzodiazepine commonly prescribed for severe anxiety and panic disorders. Quetiapine is an antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Elliot, you have levels of both drugs in your system, consistent with heavy, daily dosing over an extended period. I stared at the numbers. What would that combination do to a healthy 57-year-old man? Exactly what you've been experiencing, doctor. Martinez replied grimly. Extreme confusion, short-term memory loss, disorientation, sluggishness. If administered regularly, this specific cocktail perfectly mimics the symptoms of rapid-onset dementia. Long-term use without medical supervision could cause permanent neurological damage. Or worse, she closed the file. Elliot, this is chemical assault. I am legally required as a physician to report suspected elder abuse to the authorities. I know, I said, leaning forward, and I want her arrested. But I need 1 week. If you report it right now, she will claim I'm a paranoid old man making up stories. She'll say I'm secretly taking the pills myself and forgetting about it. She'll pack her bags, vanish into the wind, and go do this to another family. I need to catch her on video, actually putting the drugs into my cup. Dr. Martinez studied me for a long moment. She saw the absolute resolve in my eyes. 1 week, Elliot, not a single day more, and if you feel unsafe at any moment, you call 911 immediately. I left the clinic and drove straight to Warren Blackwell's office downtown. Warren was a 57-year-old estate planning attorney who had helped Rosalind and me draft our original wills decades ago. I laid out the toxicology report and Gerald Paxton's preliminary findings. We need to move fast, Warren, I said. I need an irrevocable trust. I want the house, the investment portfolios, the wine collection, and the HVAC patent royalties locked down entirely. Dominic will remain the sole beneficiary, but with a strict clause. Genevieve cannot touch a single cent, even if Dominic passes away. If something happens to my son, the assets go to designated charities. Not to her. Warren worked furiously. Within 3 hours, my entire $3 million net worth was legally armored. Genevieve could manipulate Dominic all she wanted, but she would never see a dime of my money. I've also drafted a strict medical directive, Warren added, sliding a document across the desk. No nursing home placement or transfer of medical power of attorney can occur without a unanimous diagnosis from 3 independent, court-appointed neurologists. That blocks her from using a single corrupted doctor to commit you. I signed the papers. My assets were safe now. It was time to secure the evidence. That evening, my phone buzzed. It was Gerald Paxton. Elliot, meet me at my office now. You need to see this. I told Genevieve I was running to the hardware store and drove to Gerald's office. When I walked in, he was pacing behind his desk. The files on his desk were 3 times as thick as they had been a few days prior. Her name isn't Genevieve Walsh, Gerald said, his voice flat. And it isn't Emily Foster either. Her real name is Genevieve Volkov, 28 years old, Eastern European descent, though her records are heavily scrubbed. This isn't just a scam, Elliot. It's a highly sophisticated, multi-state criminal operation. He slid a file marked Dr. James Morrison, Columbus, Ohio, across the desk 18 months ago. Gerald explained. A woman named Elena Foster Genevieve met Patrick Morrison, a structural engineer. At a conference, they married quickly. Patrick's father was Dr. James Morrison, a 61-year-old cardiologist, wealthy, sharp, entirely healthy. 3 weeks after Elena moved into his home, Dr. Morrison started experiencing severe, rapid cognitive decline. My heart hammered against my ribs, the exact same playbook. Within 2 months, Gerald continued. Dr. Morrison was declared incompetent. Elena pushed Patrick to put his father in a memory care facility. 6 months later, Dr. Morrison died. The official cause of death was listed as aspiration pneumonia, a common complication in advanced dementia patients. Genevieve inherited $2 million through Patrick, filed for divorce 4 months later, and vanished with half the estate. She murdered him, I breathed, staring at the photo of a silver-haired doctor smiling in his white coat. Yes, Gerald said grimly. After the cremation, a suspicious colleague pushed for retroactive toxicology testing on remaining tissue samples. They found traces of lorazepam and quetiapine, the exact same drugs in your system. I felt physically sick. She wasn't just trying to steal my money. She was systematically executing me. There's more, Gerald said, pulling out 2 other files. Victoria Kane in Dallas, Emily Foster in Houston. She targets young, successful men who have wealthy, aging, single parents. She marries the son, poisons the parent, forces them into a nursing home, and orchestrates a massive wealth transfer before the parent inevitably dies. 4 confirmed cases, over $4 million stolen. How does she manage the legal side? I asked, my engineering mind analyzing the logistics. You can't just transfer millions of dollars and rewrite wills without a lawyer. Exactly. Gerald pointed a pen at me. She has an accomplice. Someone is forging the power of attorney documents, falsifying the trust amendments, and fast-tracking the nursing home commitments. We haven't identified him yet, but he's likely a dirty estate lawyer. I'm going to end her, I said, my voice eerily calm. I'm going to put her in a concrete box for the rest of her natural life. The next morning, after Genevieve left for a spa day in town, I let a discreet security technician into my home. He was recommended by Gerald. In under an hour, he installed 3 microscopic, high-definition cameras in my kitchen. One was positioned above the coffee cabinet. One was aimed directly at the kitchen counter, where she prepared my drink. And one covered the sink area. The feeds recorded in 4K resolution, capturing crystal-clear audio, and uploaded instantly to an encrypted, password-protected cloud server. "You've got full coverage," the technician said, packing up his gear. "Just keep acting the part." For the next 7 days, I delivered an Oscar-worthy performance. I played the role of the rapidly declining, confused father to absolute perfection. I stared blankly at the television. I repeated stories to Dominic, watching the heartbreak in his eyes. I let Genevieve help me find my glasses, and every single morning the cameras rolled. The first alert hit my phone on December 18th at 6:47 a.m. I was lying in bed, fully awake. I opened the encrypted app and watched the live feed. Genevieve walked into the kitchen in her silk robe, humming a cheerful tune. She started the coffee maker and pulled Rosalind's chipped mug from the cabinet. Then, she reached into her expensive designer purse resting on the island. She pulled out a small, unlabeled orange prescription bottle. My breath caught in my throat. I hit the screen record button on my phone, even though the cloud was already saving it. She tapped 2 white, unmarked pills into her palm. She placed them on the granite counter, grabbed a metal spoon, and brutally crushed them into a fine, powdery dust. She swept the powder off the counter and directly into my coffee mug. She poured the hot coffee over it, stirring meticulously for 20 full seconds to ensure the drugs dissolved completely. Then, she added a heavy splash of cream and 2 sugars to mask the bitter chemical taste. She picked up the mug, completely unaware that she had just signed her own life sentence, and carried it out of frame toward my study. "Got you," I thought, taking a screenshot of the crushed pills on the counter. "I absolutely got you." Over the next 6 days I collected 7 flawless time-stamped videos. 7 consecutive counts of attempted murder, 7 indisputable pieces of evidence that would send her away forever. Meanwhile, her campaign to institutionalize me accelerated. On the 21st, she manufactured a crisis. While I was down in my workshop, she turned on a burner on the gas stove and left a pan on it until it began to smoke. When Dominic came home from work, she rushed to him in a panic. "Dom, he left the stove on," she cried, her voice trembling with perfectly faked fear. "The house could have burned down." I found him staring at the wall in the living room. He didn't even remember turning it on. Dominic came down to the workshop, his face pale, his eyes filled with tears. "Dad, the stove, you could have been hurt." I played along, hanging my head. "I don't remember. Son. I'm so sorry, my mind. It's just slipping away." That night I listened from the hallway as Genevieve delivered her final pitch. "We can't ignore this anymore, Dominic," she whispered, stroking his hair as they sat on the couch. "It's not safe. I've found an incredible memory care facility on the edge of town. They have 24-hour monitoring. He'll be safe there. It feels like a betrayal." Dominic choked out, burying his face in his hands. "It feels like I'm giving up on him." "You're protecting him," she soothed, her voice laced with venom disguised as honey. "And honestly, this house is far too much for him to maintain. If we sold it, the equity could easily cover his care for the rest of his life. The market is fantastic right now. We could probably list it for $2 million. There it was. The endgame. Institutionalize the father, sell the house, drain the accounts, and disappear into the night. It was time to spring the trap. On Christmas Eve, I went over to Norman's house. The retired math teacher was shoveling snow from his driveway. "Norman," I said, stepping close so our voices wouldn't carry. "I need to ask a massive favor. If anything happens to me, if I suddenly end up in a hospital, or a nursing home, or if I die, I need you to go straight to the Ann Arbor Police Department and tell them my daughter-in-law poisoned me." Norman stopped shoveling. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing as he processed the gravity of my words. "Elliot, are you in danger right now?" "I have it handled," I promised him. "But I need a fail-safe. Can I count on you?" "You have my word," Norman said fiercely. gripping his shovel like a weapon. "I'll testify in court if I have to." I thanked him and walked back to my house. The pieces were all on the board. The evidence was secured. The assets were locked. The next evening, during a quiet, tense Christmas dinner, I casually mentioned my schedule for the following day. "I have a follow-up appointment with my cardiologist tomorrow," I said, poking at my roast beef. "Just routine blood work. It's at the university hospital at 10:00 a.m. I'll probably be gone for a few hours." Genevieve's eyes lit up like a predator spotting a wounded animal. "Oh, Elliot, are you sure you should drive yourself? With your memory, maybe I should take you." "No, I'll be fine," I insisted, waving a hand dismissively. "It's a straight shot down Plymouth Road. I can manage." I knew Genevieve had installed a family tracking app on my phone weeks ago, under the guise of keeping me safe if I wandered off. She would be able to watch my GPS travel to the hospital and remain there. She would know the house was empty. She would know Dominic was at work. She would know it was the perfect time to break into the wine cellar and secure the financial documents she needed to execute the final phase of her plan. What she didn't know was that I had reinforced the single basement window with heavy-duty steel security bars from the inside. The only way into that cellar was through the heavy steel door, and breaking that biometric lock would leave undeniable physical evidence of a felony. The stage was set, December 26th. 9:47 a.m., I stood at the front door in my heavy winter coat, playing the part of the confused, declining old man one last time. I hugged Dominic, who was heading out to his engineering firm, and patted his shoulder with a trembling hand. "I'll be back before lunch, son," I mumbled, deliberately losing my train of thought mid-sentence. Just the doctor, blood pressure." Genevieve watched me from the kitchen island, a steaming cup of tea in her hands. I could feel the intense heat of her gaze tracking my every movement. I shuffled out to my truck, backed slowly out of the driveway, and headed down the street. I drove exactly 3 blocks. I turned onto a quiet, tree-lined cul-de-sac and parked my truck behind a neighbor's massive privacy hedge, rendering the vehicle completely invisible from the main road. I cut the engine. The heater died, and the cold Michigan winter air immediately began to seep through the glass. I pulled out my smartphone. My hands, which had been shaking just 10 minutes prior for Genevieve's benefit, were now steady as a surgeon's. I opened the encrypted security app. The screen split into 4 high-definition feeds, the 3 cameras hidden in the kitchen, and the primary camera positioned directly outside the wine cellar door in the basement. I sat in the freezing truck and I waited. At 10:03 a.m., the motion sensor on the basement camera pinged. Genevieve descended the wooden stairs, moving with a fast, purposeful energy that she never displayed when Dominic or I were in the room. She paused at the bottom landing. She tilted her head, listening intently to the silence of the empty house. Satisfied, she pulled out her smartphone and opened the tracking app. I knew exactly what she was seeing. My GPS sitting perfectly still at the University of Michigan Medical Center. I had left my actual phone with a trusted nurse practitioner at the clinic who had agreed to hold it in her office for the morning. The phone in my hand was a burner device I had purchased, specifically to monitor the cameras. Believing the house was entirely hers, Genevieve dialed a number. The basement camera's audio feed clicked on. "He's gone," Genevieve said, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete basement. "The tracker shows him at the hospital. He'll be in the waiting room for at least an hour, plus the appointment. I'm going in now. Do you have the transfer documents ready on your end?" She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Good," she replied, a sickeningly arrogant smirk spreading across her face. "Once I photograph the portfolio statements and the patent licensing agreements, we'll know the exact net worth. We move on the involuntary commitment on Friday. Just have the judge ready." She ended the call and slipped the phone into her back pocket. Then, she reached into the oversized designer tote bag she had carried down the stairs. She pulled out a heavy-duty flathead screwdriver and a solid steel crowbar. She wasn't just going to try and guess the code. She was going to tear the door apart. At 10:12 a.m., she attacked the biometric lock, even from 3 blocks away. Watching on a tiny screen, the violence of it made my jaw clench. She jammed the flathead screwdriver into the seam between the steel housing and the doorframe, hammering it in with the palm of her hand. Then, she wedged the crowbar into the gap. She leaned her entire body weight into it, prying and twisting with shocking, destructive strength. The plastic casing of the keypad cracked like a gunshot. Sparks showered the concrete floor as the internal wiring tore loose from the circuit board. With one final violent wrench, she ripped the entire $2,000 locking mechanism clean off the wall. It hit the floor in a tangle of sparking wires and shattered plastic. The heavy cellar door swung open. She stepped inside my sanctuary. I switched the feed to the internal cellar camera, which I had hidden behind a vintage bottle of champagne on the top rack. Genevieve moved through the climate-controlled room, without a single glance, at the incredibly valuable wines surrounding her. She didn't care about the 2005 Napa Cabernet. She didn't care about the memories. She marched straight to the back corner, the 1982 Bordeaux section. She reached behind the rack and felt for the hidden latch of the fireproof filing cabinet. She found it instantly. Somehow, she had known exactly where it was. Perhaps, she had mapped the dimensions of the room from the outside window and realized the internal square footage didn't match. She pulled the heavy drawer open. Inside were the thick manila folders containing my entire life's work. The HVAC patent documents, the quarterly royalty statements, the mutual fund portfolios, the deed to the Burns Park house. She pulled them out, laid them across the small tasting table, where Rosalind and I used to sit, and began systematically photographing every single page with her smartphone. I didn't wait another second. I dialed the direct cell phone number for Detective Sarah Reeves. Gerald Paxton had introduced me to Detective Reeves 3 days prior. She was a veteran investigator with the Financial Crimes Unit, and she had spent the last 72 hours reviewing the mountain of evidence Gerald and I had compiled. She was fully briefed, fully prepared, and currently sitting in an unmarked cruiser exactly 1 mile from my house. "Reeves," she answered on the first ring. "She's in," I said, my voice cold and flat. "She destroyed the biometric lock with a crowbar. She is currently inside the wine cellar, photographing confidential financial documents. I have it all on the live feed. Do not enter the house, Mr. Brennan," Detective Reeves ordered, her tone shifting instantly into command mode. "Maintain your distance. We are moving in now. ETA is less than 3 minutes." I hung up and immediately dialed Dominic's number. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Dad. Is everything okay at the doctor, Dominic?" I interrupted, projecting absolute authority into the phone. "I need you to leave your office right now. Get in your car and drive straight home. Do not ask questions. Do not call your wife. Just get here as fast as you legally can, Dad." "You're scaring me." "What's going? Just come home, son. You need to see this with your own eyes." I dropped the burner phone onto the passenger seat, threw the truck into drive, and sped out from behind the hedge. I covered the 3 blocks to my house in under 45 seconds. As I pulled into my driveway, the quiet serenity of Burns Park was shattered. 2 black and white Ann Arbor police cruisers came screaming around the corner, their lights flashing brilliantly against the gray winter sky, their sirens cutting off sharply as they slammed into park, blocking the street. Detective Reeves's unmarked sedan skidded to a halt directly behind my truck. 4 uniformed officers poured out of the vehicles, their hands resting instinctively on their duty belts. Detective Reeves stepped out, wearing a tactical vest over her windbreaker. "Mr. Brennan," she said, her eyes scanning the property. "Status?" "She's still in the basement," I replied, pointing toward the front door. "The front door is unlocked. I left it open for you. Stay behind us," Reeves commanded. She signaled to the uniforms. "Let's go, fast and quiet." We moved through the front door like ghosts. The house was perfectly silent, save for the heavy, synchronized footsteps of the police officers moving across the hardwood floors. We reached the top of the basement stairs. Down below, the door to the wine cellar was hanging wide open. The shattered remains of the biometric lock lay on the concrete, the exposed wires still sparking faintly in the dim light. Detective Reeves drew her weapon and descended the stairs, followed closely by 2 officers. I walked down right behind them, my heart hammering a furious rhythm against my ribs, but my mind incredibly, perfectly clear. We stepped into the wine cellar. Genevieve was standing at the tasting table. She had the quarterly royalty statement for my HVAC patent in one hand, and her smartphone in the other, the camera flash illuminating the dark room. She froze, the color instantly drained from her flawless, heavily moisturized face. Her eyes darted from the drawn weapons of the uniformed officers to the badge hanging from Detective Reeves's neck, and finally to me. For 3 terrifying seconds, the room was absolutely silent. I watched her brain rapidly process the situation. I watched her cycle through shock, panic, and finally a desperate, frantic calculation. She dropped the smartphone onto the table. Her eyes welled up with tears on command. It was a terrifyingly impressive physical reaction. "Oh my God," she gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her voice trembling with perfect, fragile fear. "Officers, thank God you're here, my father-in-law. He's been having terrible memory issues. Dementia. He locked himself out of his own cellar and begged me to get his important papers for him. He was so confused this morning, he made me break the lock." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, playing the role of the terrified, devoted caretaker to the absolute hilt. "Elliot, tell them you asked me to come down here and organize your files because you keep forgetting where things are." I didn't say a word. I just stared at her. Detective Reeves didn't holster her weapon. "Ma'am, step away from the table. Put your hands where I can see them. You don't understand." Genevieve cried, taking a step toward Reeves, tears now actively spilling down her cheeks. "He's sick. He doesn't know what he's doing. He told me to use the crowbar." "I never told you to do anything," I said. My voice cut through the cool air of the cellar like a freshly sharpened blade. Genevieve flinched as if I had struck her. She looked at me, truly looking at me for the first time in months. She didn't see a confused, shuffling old man. She saw an engineer who had just sprung a perfectly calculated trap. "I never gave you permission to enter this room," I continued, my voice steady, projecting absolute clarity. "I never gave you permission to destroy a $2,000 piece of security equipment. And I certainly never gave you permission to photograph highly confidential financial documents. In fact, I explicitly forbade you from ever coming down here." "Elliot, please," she whimpered, her voice cracking. "Your memory," the doctors said. "The doctors?" I interrupted, taking a slow step toward her. "Which doctors, Genevieve?" "The ones you were planning to manipulate into giving you medical power of attorney once you successfully fried my brain." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The tears stopped. The mask was beginning to slip. "Or maybe," I said, leaning in slightly, "we should talk about the doctors in Columbus, Ohio? The ones who treated Dr. James Morrison." The moment those words left my mouth, Genevieve Volkov died. The terrified, crying daughter-in-law completely vanished. Her posture straightened. Her facial muscles went completely slack, erasing all emotion. Her eyes turned into twin pools of black ice. The transformation was so absolute, so chilling, that one of the uniformed officers actually adjusted his grip on his weapon. "You're a very smart man, Elliot," she whispered, her true voice emerging flat, cold, and utterly devoid of empathy. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," Detective Reeves ordered, stepping forward with a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "For what?" Genevieve sneered, holding her ground. "Property damage? Breaking a lock in a house where I legally reside. It's a misdemeanor at best. My husband will bail me out in an hour." "Genevieve Volkov," Detective Reeves said, grabbing Genevieve's wrist and twisting it sharply behind her back. "You are under arrest for breaking and entering, destruction of property, and felony attempted theft of trade secrets." The handcuffs ratcheted shut with a heavy metallic clack. "It's a misunderstanding," Genevieve hissed, though she didn't resist. "My husband will clear this up." Right on cue, heavy, frantic footsteps pounded down the basement stairs. Dominic burst into the wine cellar, his chest heaving, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He collided with the doorframe, his eyes wide with absolute horror as he took in the scene. He saw the shattered lock. He saw the crowbar on the floor. He saw the confidential financial documents spread across the tasting table. And he saw the woman he loved, the woman he had married just months prior, standing in handcuffs flanked by armed police officers. "Jen!" Dominic breathed, his voice cracking. Dad, what is happening? What is she doing? Genevieve instantly pivoted back into character. The cold predator vanished, replaced once again by the desperate, victimized wife. Dom, honey, thank God, she cried, straining against the handcuffs. Your father, he's completely lost his mind. He called the police on me. He told me to get his files, and then he set me up. He's paranoid, Dom. You know how bad his memory has been. Dominic looked at me, his eyes pleading for an explanation. Dad, tell me this is a mistake. Tell me she's telling the truth. I looked at my son, my heart breaking for the pain I was about to inflict upon him. But a surgeon has to cut to remove a tumor. She's lying, Dominic, I said softly, about everything. It's the dementia, Dom, Genevieve screamed, thrashing slightly against the officers. He's crazy, you have to help me. She's not under arrest just for the break-in, son, I said, my voice hardening. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the burner phone. I tapped the screen, bringing up the encrypted cloud drive. I clicked on the video labeled December 18th. I turned the screen toward Dominic. The high-definition video began to play. Genevieve in her silk robe, standing in our kitchen, reaching into her purse, pulling out the orange prescription bottle, emptying the white pills onto the granite counter. What is that? Dominic whispered, taking a trembling step forward. On screen, Genevieve crushed the pills with the back of a spoon. She swept the powder into Rosalind's chipped mug. She poured the hot coffee, stirred it, and added the cream. No, Dominic choked out, his hands flying to his head. No, lorazepam and quetiapine. Detective Reeves stated clinically, reading from the toxicology report she pulled from her vest. A powerful sedative and an antipsychotic administered together, daily. They perfectly mimic the symptoms of rapid-onset dementia. She has been systematically poisoning your father for weeks, Mr. Brennan. Dominic staggered backward, hitting the wine rack. A bottle of 1998 Bordeaux rattled in its slot. He stared at Genevieve, his eyes wide with a mixture of revulsion and sheer, incomprehensible betrayal. You, Dominic gasped, unable to form a complete sentence. You poisoned him? You tried to destroy his mind? Genevieve stared back at him. She didn't cry, she didn't offer an excuse. She just looked at him with that same flat, dead expression. You were so easy, Genevieve said, her voice dropping the sweet Texas drawl, revealing a hard, cynical edge. So desperate to play house, so eager to please a pretty girl who pretended to care about your boring bridges. Dominic let out a sound I had never heard before, a raw, guttural sob of pure agony. He doubled over, burying his face in his hands. Get her out of my house, I snarled at Detective Reeves, a surge of violent, protective rage flooding my system. Move, Reeves ordered, shoving Genevieve toward the stairs. As the officers hauled her up the staircase, Genevieve looked over her shoulder at me. She wasn't angry, she wasn't scared. She was smiling. It was a cold, arrogant smirk, the look of a predator who still believed she held the winning hand. You think this is over, Elliot? She called out, her voice echoing in the stairwell. You think you've won, because you caught me on camera. You have no idea what you're dealing with. The heavy basement door slammed shut, cutting off her voice. The cellar fell silent, save for the sound of my son weeping against the wine racks. I stood in the dim light of the wine cellar, watching my son fall apart. Dominic was slumped against the mahogany racks, his face buried in his hands, his shoulders shaking with violent, silent sobs. The world he had built over the last 10 months, the perfect wife, the perfect future had just been obliterated. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him everything was going to be all right, but Genevieve's final words were echoing in my head like a warning siren. You think you've won? You have no idea what you're dealing with. I walked up the stairs, leaving 2 uniformed officers to finish bagging the evidence in the cellar. In the living room, Detective Reeves was coordinating with dispatch. Genevieve was already secured in the back of a patrol car outside. Detective, I said, my voice low. She said something on the way up. She implied this wasn't over. Reeves nodded grimly. I heard her. She's arrogant, but she's not stupid. She's banking on her accomplice to finalize whatever paperwork they had in motion. We know he's a lawyer, I said, my mind racing. Gerald Paxton said, whoever is handling the legal side of these transfers has to be deeply entrenched in estate law. At that exact moment, Norman Webb knocked tentatively on the open front door. The retired math teacher looked nervously at the police officers milling around the house. "Elliot," Norman said, stepping inside. "I saw the police cars. Is it over?" "She's in custody, Norman," I replied, shaking his hand. "Thank you. Your warning about the window saved me." Norman looked at Detective Reeves, then back to me. "There's something else I should have mentioned. I didn't think it was important at the time, but 3 weeks ago, I was walking my dog late at night. Around midnight, I saw Genevieve 2 streets over, sitting in a parked car with a man in an expensive suit. They were arguing. He kept pointing at a briefcase. Reeves stepped forward instantly. Can you describe him? White male, late 40s, maybe early 50s. Slicked back dark hair, he was driving a silver Mercedes sedan, Wayne County plates. Reeves pulled out her phone. "I'm running the alias Alina Foster and Dr. James Morrison through the Columbus PD database right now. If we can find out who handled the estate transfer in the Morrison case, we have our guy." 10 minutes later, the answer came through. "Victor Kane," Reeves announced, reading from her screen. "Prominent estate planning attorney, based out of Detroit. He's listed as the primary legal counsel on the Morrison estate transfer, as well as the Victoria Kane case in Dallas." "Kane," I muttered. "She even used his last name as an alias in Texas, the arrogance. Detroit PD is moving on his office in the Renaissance Center right now," Reeves said, a dangerous smile touching her lips. "By the end of the hour, they're both going to be sitting in federal holding." It took exactly 45 minutes. While forensics finished photographing the shattered biometric lock, Reeves received the call. The Detroit police had raided Victor Kane's law office. They caught him actively feeding documents into a heavy-duty industrial shredder. When they executed the search warrant on his servers, they found the motherlode. Hundreds of forged powers of attorney, falsified trust amendments, and backdated medical directives. All of it perfectly organized, matching the exact pattern of the 7 victims Gerald Paxton had uncovered. But the real victory came 2 hours later. I was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at the empty spot where the coffee maker used to be, when Detective Reeves returned. "Kane folded," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting heavily. "He didn't even hold out for an hour. The moment the feds offered to take the death penalty off the table for the Morrison murder, he flipped on Genevieve entirely. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for months. He's testifying. He's giving us everything," Reeves confirmed. "Every victim, every forged signature, every dollar transferred. They had $4.7 million stashed in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. They split it 60-40 in Genevieve's favor since she did the dirty work. And Genevieve," Reeves smirked, "she demanded a lawyer the second we got her to the precinct. But when her court-appointed attorney walked in and told her Kane was cooperating, the color drained completely out of her face. She realized it was over, truly over." I nodded slowly, letting the reality wash over me. "What happens to her now?" "Between the attempted murder charges here in Michigan, the elder abuse, the breaking and entering, and the federal conspiracy charges." Reeves paused, meeting my gaze, "And when Ohio extradites her for the first-degree murder of Dr. Morrison, she is going to prison for the rest of her natural life. She will never see the outside of a concrete cell again. The nightmare was finally over. The monster was locked in a cage she could never manipulate her way out of." The house was incredibly quiet after the police finally left. The flashing red and blue lights faded down the street, leaving the serene, snowy landscape of Burns Park undisturbed. I walked down to the basement. Dominic was still sitting on the floor of the wine cellar. He looked hollowed out, a 30-year-old man who had aged 10 years in a single morning. "Dom," I said softly, stepping over the shattered plastic of the biometric lock. He didn't look up. "I brought her into this house. Dad, I married her. I brought a murderer into our home. And she almost killed you. How can you ever forgive me?" I crouched down next to him and gripped his shoulder firmly. "Look at me, Dominic." He slowly raised his head. His eyes were red-rimmed and bloodshot. "You did not do this," I told him, projecting absolute certainty. "She was a professional predator. She targeted you. She engineered that meeting in Chicago. She researched our family. She figured out our assets, and she played a role perfectly designed to manipulate your kindness. But why? Dominic choked out. Why target me? I stood up and gestured to the open fireproof cabinet. Because of what's inside there. Dominic frowned, wiping his face. Your patent documents. The royalties. The royalties. I explained, bring in $31,500 a month. That's nearly $400,000 a year. The lifetime value of the patent is over $4.5 million. Combined with the house equity and my investment portfolio, my net worth is well over $3 million. Dominic stared at me, genuinely stunned. I had no idea. You always lived so simply. You drive a 5-year-old truck. You fix your own plumbing. Your mother and I made a decision a long time ago, I said, pulling out the thick manila folder containing the HVAC patent. We didn't want you growing up knowing you were sitting on a trust fund. We wanted you to build your own character, to find your own passion, to work hard because you wanted to, not because you had a safety net. I looked at my son, pride swelling in my chest despite the devastation of the day. And you did. You became a brilliant civil engineer. You built your own life. We were going to tell you the truth about the money on your wedding day. Dominic looked down at his hands. I guess my wedding day was a sham. Genevieve figured it out. I continued. Patent records are public if you know where to look. She saw the potential. She researched you, and she set her trap. I walked over to the 1982 Bordeaux section. I carefully pulled out a bottle of Chateau Petrus. It was covered in a fine layer of dust, the label slightly yellowed with age. Your mother and I bought this bottle the year you were born, I said, holding it up to the dim light. We promised each other we would open it on the day you married someone who truly deserved you. Someone who loved you for your heart, not your bank account. Dominic let out a shaky breath. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone again, Dad. How do I know the next person won't be just like her? Because you survived this, I told him fiercely. Because you are Rosalind's son. Your mother fought cancer for 16 months when the doctors only gave her 12. She never let anything defeat her. You will heal from this, Dominic. It will take time, and it will hurt, but you will learn to trust again. I set the bottle back into the rack, and when you do find that person, we'll open this wine. We stood there in the cool 55-degree air of the cellar, surrounded by thousands of memories in glass bottles. We had survived. The predator was locked away. The assets were safe, and my mind was finally, entirely my own again. I put my arm around my son's shoulders and guided him up the stairs. Come on, I said. Let's go make some tea, real tea, and I am never ever drinking coffee again. Thank you so much for sticking with me to the end of this story. It's been a long, dark journey, but sometimes you have to walk through the fire to realize just how fireproof you really are. Predators like Genevieve, and yes, they are out there in the real world, rely on our silence. They rely on our embarrassment. They count on us second-guessing ourselves, assuming that our memories are failing, or that we're simply being paranoid. Never ignore your instincts. If something feels wrong, if a person pushes too hard, asks too many questions about your assets, or tries to isolate you from the people you trust, document everything. Secure your property. Lock down your finances with ironclad legal directives. And never ever let anyone make you feel crazy in your own home. If you enjoyed this story of a father protecting his son and taking down a professional gold digger, please hit that like button down below. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Until next time, stay sharp, protect your family, and trust your gut. I'll see you in the next video.